Hello, everyone, and welcome to Music Theory 101. I'm your teacher, Andrew Lawson, and we are here to talk about some lessons in music theory and composition. This will be done in a series of videos covering a variety of topics, but video number one is going to be focusing on elements of pitch. Each of these videos are going to be geared towards aspiring musicians, whether you're in band, choir, orchestra, in general music at your school, or whether you're wanting to study composition and are looking for some more insight into how music works, then these videos are for you. If you'd like to learn more and see even more resources, whether they're through textbooks or videos, there's a giant curated list of resources on my website listed below, alawsonmusic.com. I'd be more than happy for you to visit and check those resources out on the Composer's Corner. So, lesson one, elements of pitch. We're going to be talking about the keyboard and octave registers, notation on the staff, intervals and accidentals, the major scale, the major key signatures, minor scales, and scale degree names. And so we're going to get right off onto it. So, keyboard and octave registers. So in music, we've referred to the high and low sounds, or the highness and the lowness of a sound as the pitch. In Western music specifically, these pitches are named using the first 7 letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and those go infinitely in either direction. So once we get past G, we see A again. If we want to go lower than A, we go to G, F, E, D, and so on and so forth. The distance between two notes sharing the same letter name is called an octave, and they sound the same. One is just a higher version of the lower. So we're going to use C as an example here. That's C4, that middle C on the keyboard, and then C5 sounds like this. If I play them together, all right, we can hear both of them. There are 8 keys labeled C on your traditional piano keyboard. We have C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6, C7, and C8. In between these keys, we have letters D, E, F, G, A, B, and then, of course, the cycle restarts. In between those keys, we have what are called the accidentals, which would be C sharp or D flat, D sharp or E flat, F sharp or G flat, G sharp or A flat, A sharp, and B flat. And we'll go over those more in just a moment. There are a handful of keyboards in the world that have more keys than what are shown here. A standard keyboard has 88 keys. Some commercial keyboards have less. There are a handful of special keyboards around the world that have more. There's a particularly famous one made by a company named Busendorfer. And it's, I believe, called the Grand Imperial piano. And it has a few extra keys down here on the low end. When we read music, we write it on a staff. The system of musical notation we use is very similar to a graph, where pitch is labeled on the y-axis and time is on the x-axis. And so if we were to look at points D and points G here, point D would be played first and has a higher pitch than G, which would be played later in time or second. And so we would go down from left to right. When we read music, we almost always, with very, very rare exception, read from left to right, just like we're reading a book. And we write those notes on a staff. A staff is made up of 5 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the 4 spaces in between them, 1, 2, 3, 4. Of course, with 88 keys on the keyboard, 5 lines and 4 spaces are hardly enough space to fit all of those notes, and so we also have ledger lines, which extend our staff above and below, and these continue our alphabet, and we'll go over that here in just a moment. To assign pitch to a certain line or space or ledger line above or below the staff, we have to have a clef. And a clef identifies one spot on the staff that we can use as a reference to identify everything else. The 4 most commonly used clefs that identify pitch are the treble clef, also known as the G clef, because it calls the second line of the staff G. The bass clef, which is also sometimes called the F clef, which calls the 4th line of the staff F. The following 2 clefs are related, alto and tenor clef. These are both called C clefs, and they can be moved to different parts of the staff, but an alto clef calls the middle line of the staff C, specifically middle C, C4, and a tenor clef calls the fourth line on the staff C, again specifically middle C, and these are primarily used. Alto clef is primarily used by the viola in the orchestra. The tenor clef is primarily used in the orchestral setting as well, but euphonium and trombone players sometimes see this clef. It is the least commonly used of the four clefs. From left to right, I would say that these are probably in order of how much they're used. You'll see treble and bass clef primarily in most situations, unless you're dealing with violas. Most wind instruments read either treble or bass clef, and in choir we mostly see treble and bass clef as well. In the orchestra, violins use the treble clef, while cellos and basses use the bass clef. In band instruments like the piccolo, flute, clarinet, oboe, saxophones, French horns, trumpets, and mallet percussion use the treble clef. And in bass clef, we might see trombones, tubas, euphoniums, bassoons, and instruments of those natures. Occasionally with marimba, you will also see both of these clefs using a grand staff. A grand staff is a combination of two staves joined together. The two clefs traditionally associated with the grand staff are the treble and bass clef. We see this most frequently with piano music. Marimba music frequently uses it. We see it with choral music, and we can see even more collections of this where we have more than one of these stacked together. On the grand staff, it is a key thing to note that they share one note. If we go one ledger line above the bass clef and one ledger line below the treble clef, we share a note, and that's that C4, also called middle C, because it's right here in between our two clefs. We can go all the way down here to C2 and all the way up to C6 if we just go two ledger lines above or below the grand staff, and in the middle we meet middle C. You'll frequently see notes written for the bass clef in a grand staff that go beyond that, indicating that it would be played with the left hand, and you'll frequently see things in the treble clef written below middle C, indicating that they may be played by the right hand in a keyboard situation. You'll also note that we have a lot of notes here that are not listed. This is just the natural notes. In between these, we could use accidentals, which we'll talk about in just a minute, to get a fully chromatic scale. Speaking of intervals, we have two primary types of intervals, and every other type of interval is some combination of these. First, we have a whole step. Well, I guess we should start with the half steps. Half step is just between two notes right next to each other on the keyboard. All keyboards are arranged in a configuration of half steps. For instance, we go from here, C, to C sharp or D flat. We go up to D, then to D sharp or E flat, things like that. When we see a key that contains two letter names on the same key, these are called enharmonic pitches, meaning they sound the same, but they might be written differently on the staff. They may be spelled differently. They carry the same sound. This is a C sharp. This is a D flat. Same pitch. If we add two half steps together, 1, 2, we get a whole step. And we commonly hear these in our scales, both of these intervals, which brings us to our next thing. How do we label these notes? So there are 5 primary symbols we use in Western music to identify how we lower or raise a pitch in the context of a musical line or in the context of a chord. A natural note is just that. If I were to play a C natural, it would be a plain C. If I played a C flat, I would lower that C 1 half step to a C flat. All right, if I put these together, it sounds pretty crunchy, pretty dissonant. If I lower it 2 half steps, meaning it's a whole step, I could add a double flat. And I can go the opposite directions with sharps. A sharp raises the note a half step. A double sharp raises it 2 half steps. And we can go on and on from there. Accidentals, of course, as we mentioned, can be used to raise or lower pitch. If we go up continuously by half steps, all right, in which case I just played every note between this C and this C, we can call that a chromatic scale. And a chromatic scale is simply all the notes that make up an octave. one all the way from C to C sharp, D, and so on and so forth, up in half steps. I can also play a scale using all whole steps. It's called a whole tone scale. In which case, I would play, if we're starting on C, C, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, C, going only in whole steps. We can name intervals. These are all ascending intervals. They also exist descending. But ascending intervals, if we're starting on C, we can have a unison, which is just the same note. If I play them together, you would never know it. Then we have a minor second going up one half step from C to C sharp or D flat. Together, these are rather dissonant. Then we have a major second up two half steps. 1, 2. A little less dissonant. If we go up three half steps from our root note, we have a minor third. 1, 2, 3. It's a rather sad sound. If I go up from there 4 half steps, I get a major third. 1, 2, 3, 4. A little happier sounding. If I go up 5 half steps, I get what's called a perfect fourth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a very pure sound, why we call it a perfect fourth. If I go up 6 half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to this F sharp or G flat, we get an augmented fourth. This is also sometimes called a tritone. If I go up 7 half steps, we get a perfect fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Also a very pure sound. A fun fact, if we stack that with this E in the middle, we get a major chord. All right, if I go up 8 half steps, we get a minor sixth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's kind of melancholy sounding. If I go up 9 half steps, we get a major sixth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Sorry, I misspoke. 9 half steps, we get a major sixth. A little bit happier of a sound. And if we go up 10 half steps, we get a minor seventh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If I go up 11, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, a major seventh. And if I go up 12, I get a perfect octave and a repeated letter name. This is sometimes called octave unison or perfect octave. If you're in the choir land, sometimes we call this octave unison, and the perfect unison was sometimes called prime unison. We can use all these intervals to create scales. The major scale is probably one of the most popularly used scales in Western music. It is certainly used in the majority of a lot of our literature. And it is composed of 2 shorter scales called tetrachords. These tetrachords follow a pattern of whole step, half step. In the case of this tetrachord, we have C, D, E, F. And if we create another tetrachord using the same interval pattern of whole step, half step, we get this one, the G tetrachord. If we stack the first tetrachord after the second one, the second tetrachord after the first one up by whole step, we get a major scale. From C up to C. This is the easiest one to play on the keyboard. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and then back down. We can start on these in any pitch as long as we follow this whole step, half step pattern, and then whole step, half step, and go back through. We can start on any pitch. If I start on D and do the same type of scale, I have D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. And that follows that same whole, half, whole, half. To identify which notes we have to raise or lower within a key to determine what's flat or sharp to make a major scale, we have what's called key signatures. These are typically listed right after the clef. In this instance, we have the clef at the beginning of the staff, and if we were to place any of these in isolation, we would probably have a treble or bass clef, or alto or tenor, right next to the key signature. These are all shown in treble and bass clef as we go through, and we can add flats to start on each of these tonic pitches, each of these root tones, and then we can go through sharps as well. You'll notice a couple of these shared some names on the keyboard, such as G flat major and F sharp major. These would sound the same if you played them, but they would be written very differently. The same can be said of C flat major and B major, or D flat major and C sharp major. These all share a common pitch at the beginning of their scale. We can also look at these through the circle of fifths. As we go through the circle of fifths, this is a common tool used by composers and performers alike to practice their scales, and it's also a great compositional tool and resource to think about. As we go around in fifths, you'll find that whatever the fifth note is of the scale you're thinking of, that is the first note of the next scale around. So C is the fifth note of F, G is the fifth note of C, D is the fifth note of G, A is the fifth note of D, and so on and so forth. You'll also notice as we go around this way clockwise, we are adding sharps to each one. An F major scale has one flat in it. If we remove that flat and raise that by half step or sharpen it, we end up with a C scale, which has no sharps or flats. A G has one sharp, a D scale has two sharps, an A scale has three, and so on and so forth. And then we get around here to G flat, and we start taking away flats as we go around, which would also be the same thing as sharpening. You'll also notice that there are two scales not listed here in particular, and that is C sharp and B. Well, B is right there. C sharp is not here because it's the same as D flat. Some circle of fifths include C sharp, some of them do not. Some of them will list them in the same spot. As we go around, we'll talk about the center circle of this here in just a moment. If you go backwards from the circle of fifths, you get the circle of fourths, in which we're adding a flat each time. And that would be the fourth note of whatever scale is before it. If we look back at our interval page, we'll notice that both the fourth and the fifth are labeled as perfect intervals, and that is because they are the inversion of themselves. If I go up 4 notes from C, I get F. If I go down 5 notes from C, I get F. And those are both very pure sounding intervals. So as we go through, we get minor scales, which is what that center circle was about. There are 3 primary forms of minor scales, and minor scales simply take the major scale and they flatten some of the notes. We'll keep on C for consistency. If I start on C and I want to play a natural minor scale, I'm going to lower the 3rd of the scale, the 6th note of the scale, and the 7th note of the scale by a half step, and it'll sound like this. The second type of minor scale, most commonly used, is the harmonic minor scale. It is similar to the natural minor scale, but instead of lowering the 3rd scale degree, it's raised, and essentially we're only lowering 2 scale degrees from the major scale, the 3rd and the 6th. It'll sound like this. And finally, the melodic minor scale. There is some debate in the melodic minor scale of whether this changes going up and going down. Some people believe that the melodic minor scale looks like this going up, but going down is played as a natural minor scale. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to assume that we have a raised 6th and 7th scale degree, which would sound like this. And again, there is some debate. Some people believe that those raised 6th and 7th scale degrees are lowered on the way down, which would sound like this. We see examples of both of those scales throughout a lot of classical, Baroque, Romantic literature, and even in contemporary literature. We see a mix of those two. It can be debated that in one instance we're using a natural minor scale while we're going down, and in other instances we're using the melodic. I think there's an argument either way, but for the purposes of this video, a melodic minor scale raises the 6th and 7th scale degrees. So, we just talked about major scales. Minor scales also have key signatures, and they correspond with a major scale. If a minor scale shares a key signature with a major scale, it is called the relative minor scale. So an A minor scale shares a key signature with C major, E minor with G, B minor with D, so on and so forth, and these also can follow the circle of fifths as we go around. The fifth note of A minor is E, the fifth note of E minor is B, so on and so forth. Scale degree names. This is going to come in important later in the subsequent videos. While we only have one type of major scales and there are 3 primary types of minor scales, they all share similar names. These names follow with the major scale primarily, but there are similar names for the minor scales. The first note of the scale is called tonic. The last note of the scale is also called tonic, and it could be labeled as 1 or 8 depending on the context. The second note of the scale, the second scale degree, is called the supertonic. The third is called the mediant. The fourth, the subdominant. The fifth, the dominant. The sixth, the submediant. The seventh is the leading note or the leading tone. Some people call it the leading tune, but it's the leading tone or the leading note. And then tonic. If you're in choir and you're learning solfege, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. All right, as far as major scales are concerned. So as we go through, you're going to learn that there's a relationship and a reason why these things are called the things they are. Each one of these notes has a tendency in a harmonic context to lead to another note. And so as we go through, you're going to learn more about those progressions. Thank you so much for joining on the first lesson of Music Theory 101. I hope you join us for the next lesson on elements of rhythm. Again, you can check out more resources in theory and composition on my website at alawsonmusic.com. Some of those resources are resources that I've made, and others are just links to other people's websites that are really helpful and that I find useful as well. And there are also some links to some textbooks. I don't make money off of any of those resources. There's simply links to other websites and products that I have found useful in my own career. I'm not sponsored by any of those products either. They are all things that I have found useful in my career as a band director, performer, and composer. So I hope you enjoyed this, and we look forward to seeing you on the next lesson. Thanks. Bye.